Yahoo. Bit late. Where are the students? That's 2. Well, that's not very good. Okay, just to make sure, my usual question, can you hear me? Can you see me? Thanks, okay. Right, good, good, good. Are you guys out of bed and dressed? I may want to speak to a couple today. No response. Okay. Right, let's rock and roll. Okay, so how many weeks do we have left? Is it 3 or 4 after today? I think it's 3 with the last class on 15th of July. Okay, so I got so much stuff this week, but I may cut some or leave it in the notes for you to consider. I note there's an extra holiday on 7th of July, but that won't affect us. Cisco is changing its availability as from the 1st of July. As I'm using my own account, not the university's, and I don't want to switch, I'll be limited to 50 minutes from then. So there's a risk for the class if I change to the university login. I want to avoid this anyway if I can. So make sure, guys, that you're with me next time on time, and there may be a cut-off at the end. I don't know how Cisco will do this. A problem with WebEx is that it's not possible to test anything until we go live. Fingers crossed. Although I'm still working on metadata, I'll introduce a number of other ideas that I hope will make you think about ethical and moral behavior by others. In the last 3 weeks, I'll be looking at malware, copyright, trademarks, plagiarism, professional responsibilities, and other subject areas. I'll try to make it a little less boring than it could be. I may be calling on a couple of students today, so make sure you are out of bed and wearing at least a t-shirt. Okay, question. What is the biggest risk to the internet, the biggest threat to the internet in the USA and in Thailand, according to True? What's the biggest threat to the internet? What do you think? Ransomware? Good idea? No. Anybody else? Virus? Hacking? No, no. Good ideas again, but no. Probably look at viruses next week, malware. Privacy, that is a risk. Great Firewall, that's China, isn't it? But no. The biggist risk is squirrels. Those little rodents that crawl along the... Yeah, squirrels. S-Q-U-I-R-R-E-L-S. They eat the lines. They like the plastic. They eat through the lines and then cut them. There. Little bit of information for you. Okay, 2 corrections today. I wrongly told you that BAME, B-A-M-E, was Black, Asian, Middle East. BAME actually stands for Black, Asian and Minority Ethnic. That widens the included groups. Also, in the notes, I wrote about slavery and compensation in England to former slave owners. I mentioned that compensation was still being paid off by the government in 2005. According to an article in the London Economic, that debt was not done until 2015. So it's a couple of 100 years, 150 years, that the government was still paying off debt to previous slave owners. So I've been looking at a deep look at metadata for a number of reasons. You use it, but may not be aware of the potential risks. It has values as well as problems. it can be stripped out in the main, but you would need to have a legitimate reason for this. If you upload to Instagram or Facebook, that happens automatically. You know, that's a privacy protection. And the site does that, so that's legitimate. But more than anything, as you will probably be involved in writing code, writing software, you have a responsibility to ensure that any metadata, whether it's the company, you, or the users, is properly handled. And this is why I want you to understand what metadata is and why it's so important. Okay, this next part will not be on the notes. 3 of the presentations I looked at this week made some links to the idea of metadata use. Wutikon, are you there? Yes. Do we have a picture? Chonason, you're not Wutikon. Wutikon. Camera and microphone, please, just in case I want to ask you anything. Wutikon did a presentation on Avast, and he mentions that even though the company claims the data is anonymized, it's possible to match some of the items, and this is probably done by the use of metadata, showing how critical this can be. Wutikon used the words "with the pattern of data," I wrote that down, which indicates predictability and probability from metadata collection, and therefore covers some of the ideas I've mentioned before and some we'll look at today. Wutikon, are you out of bed yet? Okay, Nat Denai, are you there? Nat Denai, I see his information. Yeah, okay. So, microphone and camera. You did a presentation on FaceApp, and that also makes clear that metadata is used. The presentation also brought out the risks with not reading the terms of service. I'll look more about this maybe next week or the week after. Note also, if anybody's used an app called Prisma, it actually does a very good job, but there are problems. That sent data, photographs, to servers in Moscow, and did not use in-device image manipulation until 2016. So imagine all the data. I mean, this is one of the top apps on the App Store. I don't know if it's available for Android. Anyway, it was one of the top apps on the App Store, and thousands, maybe millions of people were sending their photographs, including metadata, to Russia. And then the image was manipulated and sent back looking like a work of art. It's a really nice app, but I dumped it because of these reasons. If it goes to another country, they have access to the metadata. So imagine what you would sort of be at risk with. Locations, device information, much more. Kim Goodburn. Is Kim here? Kim? Kimberly Cool, is that? Yeah, okay, great, Kim. Kim's examination of Ask highlighted the types of data needed for registration, including payment information, which he notes is odd for a free app. It's a good observation. Although it's not the first time I've seen this. A lot of apps that are free do actually ask for that. And obviously what they're doing is taking your information, credit card information, which they can then use. We've got the idea of big data here. And it also takes, this was really weird, the device identifier. I've never seen that, which was really interesting and seems highly suspect to me. The amount of metadata collected here, along with the difficulties highlighted, this one that caused student suicides following bullying. So that was really interesting. Is a prime example of an unethical app. That was a good one, Kim. Again, terms and conditions are really important with what they do. It sounds like the more you looked, the more horrified you were. Any comment on that, Kim?
AskFM was a really big app when I was in middle school, like secondary school. And yeah, it was so bad to the point that in PHSE class, they actually talked about the app and said that everybody should avoid this app and
Absolutely.
how toxic the
great.
environment was on it.
Yes, I noted that that you said that in your presentation. That was some good information. One of the interesting things to me was that the data was going to, or the app was registered in Latvia. Now the Baltic countries, Russia, Ukraine, and some South American countries have a bad reputation for unethical sites. If you remember, a couple of weeks ago, guys, I sent information about an email I'd had from, what was the name? Prime Minister Shinawatra. Yeah. Which obviously was not from her, but that had come from a website in Brazil, I think. These countries have very lax regulations, and so there's a lot of danger comes from those. Kim, your accent sounds like you're educated in England, the Midlands, north of England.
No, I'm actually born and raised in Thailand.
Oh, okay. You must have had an English teacher then at your high school.
International school.
International, yeah. Okay. My French teacher said she thought I had a Welsh accent because my teacher was Welsh. Okay, okay. So guys, let's get back to metadata. So this is one of the reasons I've mentioned the use of data by political organisations and the contact tracing app that the British government was trying to develop. They refused to use the Apple Google contact tracing solution that's careful what private user data is collected and shared. They spent a lot of money, I think it's more than 100 million was spent to companies linked to Dominic Cummings, who does understand the value of big data and how it can be used politically. He's a person I don't like, but he's highly intelligent and he understands how this stuff works. So last week, the British government admitted that their app was not working. By all accounts, it was a disaster, and have now decided to use the Apple Google solution, which they were told to do in the first place. So not only has all this money been wasted, but several weeks have passed when people have not been traced. You will remember that the Thai authorities came up with a quick and dirty solution, and most seem to be okay with that. It's a pain if you have to go in and out of shops, say in Siam Paragon. You've got to check in, check out, and then go to another shop. But it does seem to take the information okay. But what is the government doing with that information? Ethical question there, guys. If you have recently updated your Android or iOS device, there is now an ability to allow an app, none exists so far, to access the tracing API. So for iPhones, I know nothing about Android, that is in settings, privacy, health, and the exposure logging capability, which will be activated by an app when one comes, is currently off and grayed out. So the capability is now there if you've updated your phones. question to the whole class. Is there anyone here who is a US citizen? Not me. Okay, thank you, Nat Denai. I was actually after, okay, so I just wondered if we got anybody who was Harsep, you know, sort of 50-50. Okay, so this won't, some of this won't apply to you then. No, actually, let me reverse that. So this will apply to you. Last time we ended with the forum at which General Michael Hayden made some comments on metadata. You know, we kill people using metadata. That forum was in the rush to find out what the information all meant after Edward Snowden had let the cat out of the bag regarding the NSA surveillance programs. Snowden had been concerned that they were overstepping the bounds, and a lot of people think that they were. The bounds of the laws that existed then and of the US Constitution. Note that none of the comments and laws apply to us. This is only about US citizens. And if they read my email or yours, or listen to your telephone calls, check your website history, that is all totally legal, as you are not American, and I am not American, right? So the laws only apply, the restrictions to those security agencies only apply to US citizens. They can, the Americans, NSA, CIA, can do what they like with my data, with your data. You know, they can just follow you, check you, and take all your data quite legally. There are no laws that restrict them on this. It's only applying, yeah, right. It only applies to US citizens, okay? So Chelsea Manning, I forget his name originally. He was originally a guy, but he's now a girl. Chelsea Manning released a lot of files and videos to WikiLeaks and showed how the United States was not as good as it claims to be. She's in jail right now under a contempt charge. You know, she won't admit or explain to the courts what she knows. So therefore that puts her in contempt of court. If Edward Snowden is ever in the hands of the US authorities, he would never see the light of day, presuming he was not executed for treason. You know, he did actually give a lot of information, but some people say he should be protected under whistleblower rules. A lot of people, politicians and the like, insist that he was treasonable. That would have to come out in court. So Julian Assange, formerly of WikiLeaks, is currently in prison in the United Kingdom for jumping bail. He held up in the, I think it was the Ecuador embassy for a couple of years until the police raided eventually. I think that was illegal anyway, because an embassy should be protected. So where am I? He's a journalist, although he's not really a nice person. There's that film with Benedict Cumberbatch, which portrays him quite well, and it shows him as really not a very nice person at all. But he is a journalist and did some very interesting things. He was contacted by Manning and Snowden and others because WikiLeaks and Assange could be trusted. So the files that they released were carefully examined before being publicly released, so no risks to serving personnel were made. Now this is interesting because if he puts CIA personnel at risk, then he would be guilty of treason. On the other hand, Vice President Cheney, arranged for the name of Valerie Plame to be released in revenge for her husband's report casting doubt on the export of yellow cake, uranium yellow cake, from Niger. There's a movie about this called Fair Game, and it's well worth seeing. Valerie Plame was a CIA agent. She was serving, and her husband was a former ambassador with a lot of knowledge about Africa. He showed that the amount of yellow cake that Niger was able to produce would never have been enough to allow uranium to be produced for a nuclear weapons program in Iraq, as the White House was alleging. Likewise, they had pictures of aluminium tubes, but these were not the right material for producing centrifuges. The centrifuge is one of the essential pieces of equipment when refining uranium to make nuclear weapons. But the United States administration insisted that they were. You know, these pieces of aluminium, these aluminium tubes, were of the right quality. The United Nations weapons inspectors Hans Blix and Scott Ritter had full control of the examination of the destruction of chemicals and devices, but the United States government insisted Saddam Hussein had these. Again, another movie, The Green Zone with Matt Dillon. This is about the search for weapons of mass destruction that don't exist, never did. But the interesting thing is that companies run by Cheney, Donald Rumsfeld and others had sold chemicals to Saddam Hussein years before, but these had been destroyed. So the whole invasion was based on lies. In the mid-1990s, I read a book, The Spider's Web. This was about 10 years before the Iraq War. And it made clear the involvement of US and UK politicians in supplying chemicals and other weapons to Saddam Hussein as a balance against Iran. I mean, it was a balance of power in that part of the Middle East. Guys, it's all about oil. It always is. There's a link there to the Spider's Web, a review. So your data is valuable to companies and criminals and to the authorities. Data mining, I've got a definition of data mining in the notes. I'm not going to read it out, it's too long, or part of it. It predates the use of data by Facebook and Cambridge Analytica. But let me read the conclusion. This is several years before Facebook and Cambridge Analytica. Second paragraph says, a new technological leap is needed to structure and prioritize information for specific end user problems. The data mining tools can make this leap. Quantifiable business benefits have been proven through the integration of data mining with current information systems, and new products are on the horizon that will bring this integration to an even wider audience of users. So this is really a prediction of how data, big data, could be used. So predictions and trends normally, you know, before the bad guys got hold of this, were things like just-in-time ordering, the supply chain. Now, Tim Cook is an expert at supply chain. He's an industrial engineer. Username lists, very important. You know, the apps that we use. Endless emails. You get these because we shop in a store or look at a website. You know, you keep getting stuff coming over and over again. My junk mail box is full up with this stuff. And now with big data, we have political predictions leading to electoral interference. Right? So while some of this stuff, metadata use, can be beneficial. Some of it can be pretty dangerous. In the same way as there is with files, there's a considerable amount of residual data. We looked last week about the metadata that's included in files like documents and XLS files. As we use the internet or go about our lives, we leave a trail of data: name, address, phone, purchasing information, credit card details. These are sometimes referred to as breadcrumbs. Do you know the story of Hansel and Gretel? No? Oh, wow. Some do, some don't. Okay, it's a Grimm's fairy tale, I think, but it's actually a story. So I'm going to take a real big aside here. Hansel and Gretel, the story is that their parents wanted to get rid of them, so they took them into the forest, where they met an old witch who wanted to eat them. So let me get back to my notes. It's treated as a fairy tale. Wicked mother, wicked witch, but it has its roots in a great famine in the 14th century. A famine is when there is no food. Like other famines, the Irish potato famine and the Bengal famine, which was when Britain was in charge of India and refused to feed people in Bengal. I mean, thousands died. So people starve and families are split up. In the 14th century, there were also reports of cannibalism. It's rare, but it's not unknown in the West. Do you guys know what cannibalism is? Yes, 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 Crab. Okay, so that sounds very happy. Have you ever eaten anybody? Is it right? Is it morally justifiable to eat another person? Bite your nails. That's very good. I like that. Yeah, there was a quick one there. I missed who that was. At the brink of dying. Okay, so here's some points. So in 1884, there was a cabin boy on a ship called Richard Parker, and he was eaten by surviving shipmates after they ran out of food, and Parker was almost dead anyway. Two of the guys were tried for murder, and there was an unusual trial process because public sympathy was with the people, with the guys who'd survived. They were found guilty of murder, but because of public sympathy, the automatic death sentences were reduced to 6 months. You know, so the public sympathy helped a great deal there. There's a movie that I saw in 1976 called Survive. It's about a Uruguayan rugby team. They were in a plane crash in the Andes and they were off course anyway. I actually fainted during this movie, even though in my work time at that time I would see dead and injured people every day. But when I was viewing this movie, I just went zonk out. So after the cashew nuts had run out, some of those left alive ended up eating those who had been killed in the crash. You know, bits of, they were very reluctant to do this, but it was the only source of protein, of course, and it was very cold up in the Andes. They were actually forgiven by the families, by the church, because they're religious people as well, because of the essential nature of the survival. There was a movie, Alive, made in 1993, but the one I saw in the 1970s was Survive. It's on iTunes, I checked yesterday, but not on Netflix. The trailer looks very grained and dated. Also, Hannibal Lecter. You've heard of Hannibal Lecter? Yes, no? Yes, yeah, Silence of the Lambs and a couple of other movies as well. Quid quo pro, I think, was one of the famous phrases there. Well, Hannibal Lecter was actually based on a real person, Dr. Alfredo Bali Trevino, who was in prison for killing and eating his lover. So that's a real story. Although Hannibal Lecter obviously killed and ate far more. There was, oh yeah, there was also Armin, I can't say this, it's a German name, Meiwes, Mavis, I don't know, who advertised for someone to be eaten. And more than yes, he actually advertised this. More than 200 people replied to the advertisement. Imagine that, 200 people want to be eaten. And Bernd Brandis was the lucky victim. Now, first, together, they ate Brandis' fried penis together. Okay, and after he was dead, yes, true story. I've got a link in the notes so you can check it up yourselves. I heard about this when the first arrest occurred. After he was dead, he was cut up with some stored in the freezer. Mavis had eaten about 20 kilograms before the police knocked on the door. And he said, with every bite, my memory of him grew stronger. So this goes from breadcrumbs and Hansel and Gretel to the idea. I decided to extend the idea to look at the ethical problems here. Each of those has an ethical problem. Probably not Hannibal Lecter, of course. That's fairly straightforward. But the others, you know, the victim with that last one actually volunteered to be eaten. Maywis was tried and then tried again. He actually got life imprisonment for murder at the end. But this is weird. So back to Hansel and Gretel and the breadcrumbs. As the mother tried to lose them in the forest, Hansel left a trail of breadcrumbs to find the way home, but the birds ate them. So they ended up at a gingerbread house. This is a very famous part of the story, where the old witch who lived there wanted to eat them. You know, young kids, very delicious, you know. Gretel pushed her in the oven, and we all lived happily ever after. Lots of these old stories have elements of truth to them, but Hansel and Gretel is actually an ethical swamp. Look up Humpty Dumpty and the nursery rhyme, Bar Bar Black Sheep. They all have origins in reality. Okay, so breadcrumbs. Every time we make a transaction or interact with some service, there is a data shadow of where we've been and what we've done. Companies use this information to look for trends, customer types, purchase histories, and Cambridge Analytica also looked for trends. This is good and bad. When I've made expensive purchases in the past, like a camera or a computer, these have phoned me to make sure. Now we also have SMS messages, and that's very quick. So that follows most transactions, so we can see what we're buying and confirm. So this is why credit card theft is traced when large purchases are made, but hard when the thief makes small purchases. There was a teacher at MUIC. She had her credit card stolen or duplicated in a restaurant, and she didn't realize that they were buying clothes and food and odd things, even though her bill was getting quite big. if she looked at the analysis, the shopping was of small items, not large items, and that's how people get away with it, because nobody notices. One of the last, okay, let me see if I can see the, where's the notes? Chat there. Last time I bought a 30-baht line stick at KTC, called me to ask for confirmation. Wow, 30 baht. Okay, I don't understand that. Krung Thai, yeah, I don't use them, okay. One of the reasons Apple had a fight with publishers over apps concerned the use of customer data. It likes to keep that private. There's been a disagreement with Spotify over subscriptions, but Apple applies rules pretty much equally across the whole App Store ecostructure, even changing some rules recently to deal with changing trends. But Spotify wants to be different. The app was not accepted. This week there's been a lot of noise about Apple's App Store infrastructure and charges. They're already under investigation in the EU. What happened? Somebody come on, go off. We can also expect some pressure from US politicians. There's a current dispute with a company called Hey, which is something to do with email. This is over in-app charging. Many are now unhappy, come public in the last week, unhappy with the structure of the Apple Store. So Apple yesterday just announced a new appeals process in which not only can the decision be appealed, but the rules themselves can be disputed. This seems to be an attempt to lower the temperatures, but could also lead to some flexibility as the rules are adjusted. Google wants online data public, money and selling your information. This is one of the reasons I have a lot of problems with Android, and not just Google. There was a problem in the United States with the use of Google Chrome computers to replace iPads, when it was found that, surprise, Google was taking all the data of the students that logged in, had to log in to use the computers. Here at Mahidol, USAID had a program centered on Mahidol that expanded to other Thai establishments as well as to more Southeast Asian countries. The computers used were Chromebooks, as Google was one of the original sponsors of the program. I mentioned the question of data of the students a couple of times, but no one here seems to understand the potential for abuse. Every student who joined that program had to register to use the computers in the program, and so therefore Google had their data. I really question that. We have got a couple of links there. One called Follow the Data Down the Rabbit Hole. The rabbit hole refers to Alice in Wonderland by Lewis Carroll. It's always worth a read. And there's, with that book, or is it an article? It is an article on TechCrunch. There's some overlap between the ideas of data mining and security. And another one piece of information was when researchers showed how easy it was to de-anonymize shoppers' data. Who was that? Maybe all you students gone. Wutikon, that was part of your argument with the application you did a presentation on, that even though the data was not available, they were able to sort of piece it together by I'm making this up as I go along. by putting, using the metadata and joining stuff up. So even though the app was anonymous, or the information was anonymous, they could still identify people. So this article shows that despite data being stripped out of credit card information, shoppers could be re-identified if there were 4 pieces of information that showed their movements on particular days. So again, this is a metadata problem. By picking up these breadcrumbs, they can actually find out, even though the data should be anonymous, this purchase information could produce the identity of the shoppers. And this is what happens. The companies say that the data is collected but never used. Go back to Michael Hayden, we kill people using metadata. They store the information, but they never use that. I sincerely have doubts about that. Who uses D-Link routers? Have I got one here? No, it's something else. D-Link routers are subject to DNS hacking, again, which brings up a question of ethics. There's another link there. Okay, Apple, Facebook, Google, Twitter, Vizio, a lot of others, they stole watching habits, IP addresses, track devices, sold viewers' identities to advertisers. Okay, what do we got? I've finished quite early. Well, let me go on to some other things then. I'm going to talk about intellectual property and related ideas. Have I really finished today? All that stuff? Yeah, okay. Gone fast. Let's see if I can... Okay, trademark, copyright, end-user license agreements, patents and plagiarism. So 2 questions to start with. Can you patent a fish? Maybe. Yeah, that's probably the best idea, actually. Okay, in the Smithsonian magazine, I'll add a link for that. There was an article a couple of years ago about a German company that was patenting a lot of fish and other aquatic animals in the hopes that at some time in the future their DNA or other substances that were found in these animals could be used for developing drugs and for other medical purposes, because there's a lot of money in big pharma. That's P-H-A-R-M-A, not F-A-R-M-E-R. Okay, so yeah, certain parts of it can be patented, not the whole fish itself, but certain parts. We talked, I think, last week about, or did I do this with another class, Cisco and the original iPhone. Which was not owned by Steve Jobs or by Apple. It was owned by a company that Cisco took over. So the original iPhone was that Ethernet device. So here's another question for you guys. Who originally owned the trade name Apple? No questions. Was it random? Random kid? No, it wasn't a random kid. It was quite serious, actually. Okay. I think I read about it but forgot. Yeah, that happens. Wait till you get my age. Forget lots of things. Any more? Are you guys awake in there? Nobody else? I have no clue. Well, that's not a good answer. Isaac Newton. That's good, because Apple, the computer company, one of their first logos actually included Isaac Newton in it. It was a very complex icon, and they trimmed it down to that Apple thing that we all know today. No, it was the Beatles. The music group started about 1963. Their company that produced the music was named Apple. And when Apple in America started in California, there was a massive dispute and a couple of court cases. And in the end, they agreed that Apple in America, Steve Jobs' Apple, could use the trade name for computers and devices like that, but not for music. But then the iPod arrived and iTunes arrived, and Apple sued again, Apple England sued again the Beatles. And there was a court case. They eventually settled. And so Apple now controls everything. Everybody's forgotten the Beatles. Good music, but that's been forgotten. Okay, so let's see if I can get into this very quickly. Share content, Yahoo screen, and down we go. I can't remember where this is, help. Oh, well, let me do this another way. I have to find this in a different way. Session 8. There, guys. What can you see there? BTS. Yeah. Logo. Yes. Instantly recognizable. Okay. A lot of windows and tabs. Yeah, they've gone. I've just got the one thing now. So let me centralize that, make it full screen. There you've got the words BTS. But if you see that alone, you can actually see or understand that that is the BTS logo. It's a very clever logo actually, because it symbolizes the intersection at Siam. You've got the two lines going both ways. And because it's red, white and blue, it's also symbolic for Thailand. So whoever put that together did a very good job. Okay, so what's this? This one at the bottom. Anybody going to tell me? What do we see here? Are you still connected?
Yes, Kapachan. You just have to open a chat, but we all said Apple, yes.
Yeah, okay. Oh, yeah, okay. Sorry, I didn't see that. I think I made it large screen. That's the problem. Yeah, okay, so let me see if I can do that again. Okay, so yeah, very distinctive. And can you see my cursor? Why is there that, okay, why is there that cutout there?
Was it to avoid some other trademark? I'm not sure. Maybe it's to avoid the trademark.
No, good idea, but no, not that. It's to avoid something. Anybody got any ideas? Obviously not. It's a question of scale. If there were no cutout there, it could look like a cherry. But because of the size of the bite mark, not symmetry, Prapacorn, but because of the size of the bite mark, this is obviously an apple. So it's a question of scale, even though it's just a silhouette, to give you an idea that this is actually an apple. Okay, so I'll go on with trademark and other similar stuff next week. Any questions, any comments? Okay, let's have lunch.